Now on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare, that you may eat the Passover?" And he sent out 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." So his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. In the evening he came with the 12. Now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful, and say to him one by one, "Is it I?" Another said, "Is it I?" And he answered and said to them, "It is one of the 12, who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born." My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Mark chapter 14, verses 12 to 21. The form of words recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, were taught by the apostles from the very beginning, but they were transmitted orally for the first 15 or so years, maybe 20 years. Nevertheless, these words were words used to summarize the events among people who knew exactly what had happened, people who were there, who understood the Jewish traditions and ways. But for our perspective, we see some confusion because the details are brief and we do not know all the context. And that confusion is addressed by John's Gospel, which was written much later, to a Gentile audience, to people who were not familiar with the ways and customs of the Jews. And a key part of this is that when we read the Synoptic Gospels, it seems Jesus has the Passover supper with his disciples on this Wednesday evening. But John makes it plain that the chief priests killed their Passover lambs on the following day, on the Thursday, and had their Passover meal on the Thursday evening. Evidently there was a difference in tradition between the Pharisees of Galilee and the chief priests, who were Sadducees, one of many arguments that persisted in the nation of Israel. And Jesus is following the interpretation of the Pharisees. So he sends 2 of his disciples to prepare the Passover for them to eat on the Wednesday evening. He doesn't just tell them where to go, because the whole group is present and Judas is there. If Judas knew where they were going to hold the Passover, then he would be able to go during the day and tell the authorities, the chief priests, where it was, so the priests could raid the Passover meal. But Jesus wants to eat the Passover with his disciples, and so he doesn't name the address. He tells 2 of his disciples, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." Again, the expression, "a man will meet you," suggests that the disciples would recognize the man and the man would recognize them, although neither knew beforehand exactly whom they were meeting. It would appear as a chance meeting, as when you go down the street and see someone you know. But the disciples would know a few people in Jerusalem, so the particular one that they needed to speak to was the one carrying the pitcher of water. It turns out that this house was most likely Mark's own house, that his mother and father were the owners of the house, and it was one of the servants of the house, no doubt, who was bringing water to the house, who led the disciples to the house. I suspect Jesus had made some previous arrangements with his hosts because they had prepared the upper room. It was furnished and ready. Mark's uncle Barnabas will become one of the early leaders among the believers, so much so that he is also called an apostle. But Jesus doesn't actually give the address because Judas must not know where it would be. And the disciples make the preparation for the meal that they will have that evening. Now, we're not given any details here. Was there a lamb at this? Was there unleavened bread? These are questions that people have asked, because the official date and time orchestrated by the chief priests was the following day. For most of the last 2,000 years, the Jews have celebrated Passover without a lamb. Jesus holds this formal Passover meal with them on this Wednesday evening. And so when evening comes, they all gather, and Jesus, among all the other things that happen that evening, Mark highlights Jesus saying, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one by one, "Is it I?" And another says, "Is it I?" Now, leading up to this day, Jesus had told the disciples that he would be betrayed to the chief priests. They would condemn him and hand him over to the Gentiles, and that the Gentiles would mock him, abuse him, and ultimately crucify him. Some have tried to defend Judas Iscariot, suggesting that he was thinking that he was going to push Jesus into making a public declaration that he was the Messiah. But we can be sure Judas was under no illusions about what was going to happen after Jesus was betrayed. Jesus is very specific because all along he has known that Judas would be the one. But he is not telling Judas to do these things. Judas is fully responsible for what he is doing, but he is allowing Judas to do what he will do. All the other disciples are surprised. I? Me? It had not crossed their mind that they would do it. But of course Judas knows. And Jesus' answer is, "It is one of the 12. It's one of you who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born." The thing that leads Judas to this is his own heart, his own love for money. He's more interested in 30 pieces of silver than the agenda that God has. And Jesus knows from the Old Testament scriptures that one of his faithful men, familiar friends, will be the betrayer. We're reminded of the story of David, for Jesus' experience reflects much that happened in David's life. One of David's very wise supporters was a man called Ahithophel. But Ahithophel was ambitious and supported Absalom against his father David. And Ahithophel gave advice concerning how David could be executed. Hushai countered that advice, and Absalom followed Hushai's advice, which meant the downfall of Absalom. But Ahithophel realized when Absalom did not take his advice that Absalom was doomed, and he was doomed, and he went and committed suicide, as indeed Judas would do, rather than to face up and confess to Jesus that he had done wrong. Bad things happen to good people, and those who cause these bad things will be judged. God knows each of our days from the day of birth to our day of death, and he has a plan for them when we walk in his way. But if we do not love him with all of our heart, and therefore choose to do other things, then there are consequences for us. And Jesus said it would have been better for Judas Iscariot to have never been born.